Hello, everyone. Let's get started. People will continue to zoom in. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Lauren Kuby, and I lead community outreach and events for the GOC, the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation, which is part of the Julie M. Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory here at ASU. And it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dave White. He is the director of ASU's Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation, and he's also the Associate Vice President for Research Advancement Knowledge Enterprise. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our speaker today. Alexis Villacis is an assistant professor in the Morrison School of Agribusiness and ASU's W.P. Carey School of Business. And as an agricultural economist, Alexis's research is focused on international agribusiness, food supply chains, farmer behavior, and international agricultural development. He has worked extensively in Latin American region, including Honduras, Nicaragua, and most recently, he has worked extensively with cacao farmers in Ecuador. Before we begin, a reminder to you to the audience, please enter your questions into the Q&A feature at any time. Lauren will curate those questions and provide them to me as the moderator. And we'd like to get as many questions as possible to inspire a lively discussion and conversation after we hear the initial presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to our speaker. Welcome and thank you, Alexis.
Thank you, Dave, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Dave already mentioned my name is Alexis Villacis. I'm an assistant professor at the Morrison School of Agribusiness, and today I'll be sharing with you a little bit of my experience on chocolate, cacao, and climate change. I was just telling the other panelists that I've been working on the cacao sector and by definition also in the chocolate sector since 2012 after I finished my master's. So long story short, I've been living in a couple places. I've been living in Honduras, in El Salvador, spent a couple years as well in Indiana, Michigan, here in the US, Virginia. I also spent a couple of years in China, also at Austria. And one thing that I really like about all this exposure is that in all these places that I've lived before, I have found chocolate and people has been fascinated by chocolate, by candies, and by cacao. So to begin the presentation, I'd like to show you some facts. I'd like to start with some straight facts, especially these are related with the US in terms of cacao and chocolate consumption. And as I mentioned before, no other consumer products enjoy the universal appeal of chocolate and candy. And I really like this about chocolate because it transcends, as I mentioned before, countries, religions, belief, political views, and so forth. All of us like chocolate. In fact, according to the National Confectioners Association, 72% of Americans say chocolate and candy are an important part of their emotional well-being. And I mean, it's a pretty common strategy to cope with shocks, right? I'm pretty sure that at least any of you watch a movie during this season, this Valentine season, where, you know, after a breakup, you see one of the people in the movie go and cope their emotional well-being with a box of chocolate. So that's pretty normal. It's pretty standard. It's part of our lives. 99% of American households buy chocolate or candy at least once a year. I would love to say it's 100%, but no, in fact, there is a small segment of the populations that have misperceptions or health-related issues that prevent them from consuming chocolate. And 78% of Americans believe that sharing seasonal chocolate and candy is a great American tradition. Consumption of candies and chocolates, you know, it happens throughout the whole year, but the peaks of consumption happens what we call the big four seasons here in the US. One of them is the Valentine's Day that we just happened to pass a couple of days ago, but also Easter, you know, it's related with the Easter eggs that are full of chocolates. Halloween, I don't have to say more details about Halloween. Everything is also about chocolate. And during the winter holidays, we like, especially during cold weathers, we like to share, you know, a hot chocolate with our friends, right? So these seasons are the ones that actually spike consumption. But again, consumption of chocolate happens throughout the whole year. For you to have an idea, here in the US, the size of the confectionery industry that includes not only chocolate, but also candies, gums, meats, and so forth, is around $37 billion. And from those $37 billion that represents sales in 2020, 22 are attributed to chocolate products, which, it's more than 50%. I think it's almost 60% of the whole confectionery industry, which, highlights the importance of chocolates in the US. Even with the pandemic, we have seen that the sector, chocolate consumption, chocolate sales, chocolate production have been doing remarkably well. So compared to 2019, during 2020, sales at the grocery stores experienced a 10% increase in chocolate products. But what is more remarkable is that online sales of chocolates increased by more than 70%. And I mean, I can relate to this. I don't know about you guys, but during the pandemic, I have eaten a lot more. I have gained a couple more pounds, but it's because, we look for strategies to cope with, our emotional well-being, and we like to go to the supermarkets and treat ourselves, or just order it online. And we have been, at least in my case, I have been experiences with a whole bunch of new products because I have more time to spend on my place, and explore this type of products. 77% of consumers feel physical health and emotional well-being are connected. And as I mentioned before, this is also related with the consumption of chocolate to cope with our emotional well-being. 81% of consumers agree that it is completely fine to occasionally treat yourself with chocolate or candy. For me, it's completely fine to treat myself every day with this type of products. But anyways, more than the half of shoppers like to buy from companies that give back to the community or charities. And this is something really important we have been observing in the development of cacao and chocolate markets during the last 15 or 20 years, where we see that consumers are pressing more for products that are socially responsible, that are environmentally friendly, and labels have come into play in the cacao and chocolate products. If you go to the store here right next, we have a Fry's or Walmart or Whole Foods, you will see that it's more and more common that chocolate products now come with all these labels that certify the product to be not only gluten-free or organic, which are nutritional related components of the product, but also labels such as fair trade, and that kind of things that reflect that a product gives back not only to the community, but also to the environment. So having said that, it's pretty easy to understand that fluctuations in chocolate consumptions and change in the consumer trends have economic impacts across the chocolate processing industry. And we have so many chocolate processing industries, not only here in the US or around the world. For example, we like to call the top 5 companies such as Mars, which have headquarters here in Chicago, Hershey's, which is another giant that is located in Pennsylvania, but we also have Nestle, Mondelez in Europe. We have Meijis in Japan, which also are big players in the chocolate processing industries that are the ones that link the raw materials with the consumers, because chocolate products are made of cacao beans, and we probably haven't heard about them so much, but these cacao beans are normally produced overseas and imported to the processing countries, right? Like the US, for example. There are also huge, as I already mentioned, industries for processing chocolate in Japan, in Germany, and throughout whole Europe. Switzerland, it's very well known for the high quality of chocolates they manufacture. So the impacts on, or the changes in consumption, have impacts beyond the processing industry, because they also impact farmers all around the world. So chocolate sale increases during the big 4 seasons that I already mentioned before also translate into opportunities for cacao exporting countries. The pandemic has shown that, because our increased consumption of chocolate products have also increased production in other countries as a result, production of cacao beans. So depending on the type of a product a chocolatier or a chocolate processor wants to elaborate, they might need a specific type of cacao beans that are produced in different countries around the world. And here I'm gonna make a simplification, but I want you to introduce you to the world of cacao and chocolate. So as I mentioned before, cacao is the main ingredient to produce chocolate products, right? So when it comes to cacao beans, we have mainly 2 groups of varieties. One group that we like to call the ordinary cacao, which is what we are seeing right here in our slide. here in this picture, you see the cacao pod, which is red color. So once you open the cacao pod, you see the beans, right? These beans are in a wet condition. They are covered by a white layer. And what I wanted to mention here is that we use this ordinary cacao to produce mass consumption products like your M&Ms or your Snickers, which if you actually pay really close attention, is mostly sugar. So why is this? Well, because this ordinary cacao is or doesn't have too much flavor or too much aroma, okay? So you use this type of ordinary cacao varieties to produce chocolate products that are not really heavy in the content of cacao in this case. Again, M&Ms and Snickers are mostly sugar, what we eat when we eat this type of products. Also, we have on the other side what we call the fine and flavor cacao varieties. People also call them specialty cacao varieties. As you can see here, these cacao varieties, the pod of the cacao is different. If you see, it's not red compared to ordinary cacao, it's a yellow color. But once you open the pod, you'll see that the beans are actually pretty much the same. You know, the white layer covering the bean, it's also wet condition. So that's a pretty strong simplification that I'm making here, because of course there are some varieties that are of orange colors that you're not really decided if it's ordinary or from a specialty variety. Also, there are some countries where it's quite the opposite. For example, in Cameroon or in Madagascar, they also have specialty varieties that have a pod of red color, which, you know, complicate things, but there are very few exceptions. So the general rule is that most of the specialty or fine and flavor varieties come in a yellow pod, the ordinary varieties come in a red pod. But anyways, going back to our description of fine and flavor cacao varieties, these cacao beans, they have really a strong flavor and aromas that are pretty unique, okay? These are fabulous and tremendous, and these are mostly used to produce what we call gourmet chocolates, all right? If you pay close attention here to the slide I'm showing here, in the top, we have this brand of chocolate called Toac, which is actually processed and elaborated in Ecuador. This little bar, for you to have a reference, is like the size of my hands, the circle I'm doing with my hands, and it can reach a cost of around $500. So it's a very gourmet, very specific niche market that that targets these specialty cacao beans and these gourmet chocolates. And for example, I've been blessed. I have been invited to try Toag once. And once you actually open the little box that you have here, you will see that it will come not only with the chocolate bar, also with tongues, because it is supposed, or at least the chocolatiers told us, that if you touch the chocolate bar with your hands, the oil that we have in our skin actually change the flavor of the cacao. So you have to use your tongues to use this type of chocolates. I mean, if someone is paying $500 for this little bar of chocolate, of course they will follow the procedure, right? But these gourmet chocolates are exploding. So during the last 10 or 20 years, is a niche market that keeps increasing. For example, in the bottom picture, we have this other brand, Porcelana Amede, which is actually from Italy. And this bar is also around $200 right now. So again, the logic behind these gourmet chocolates is that they use these fine and flavor cacao varieties because they are super rich in flavor. And these gourmet chocolates have a content of cacao that is way above 60, 70, 80, even 90%. So if you're going to elaborate a product that have a really high content of cacao, you need the very best product in terms of aroma and flavor, and that's why you need these specific varieties. So I'm just gonna show you really quick to give you the full picture of how these beans are transformed into chocolate. So after the cacao beans are harvested, they need to be fermented and dried, which are pretty common post-harvest practices conducted by farmers in the producing countries, right? So fermentation normally happens in these wooden boxes. So there are people that get really fancy and say, depending on the different type of boxes that you use, you might develop different flavors and aroma. But again, these farmers are mostly located around the equator in developing countries. And most of the cases, they do not have capital to invest in fermentation practices. So for example, here in the picture on the right, you will see that they do this fermentation just on the ground, and they will just cover the beans with banana leaves, right? So again, there is a lot of heterogeneity in the process. Same thing we have observed in drying, and I'm not only talking about here, Ecuador. You see these same things happening all over around the world, in Indonesia, in Madagascar, in Ghana, and Ivory Coast, and so forth. Drying, most of the cases is conducted using sunlight. Also, some people also invest in greenhouses or canopies, as you can see here in the pictures. But again, if farmers lack capital, access to financial services, what they will do is just literally dry their beans on the side of the highways, as you can see in the picture on the bottom right. So of course, this have further implications, because even if you have the best variety in the world, if you dry them in that way, the smoke from the cars that are driving right next to it are going to have an impact on the product, right? Also, because countries that are really, really close to the equator have very unpredictable rains, it's very likely that unpredictable rains are going to affect the drying process of the beans. So going again a little further in our discussion of where these cacao beans are produced, well, they are mostly produced about 20 degrees north and south of the equator line. So all the countries that you see highlighted in different colors are the ones that are normally producing cacao or have the conditions to produce cacao. One thing that I wanted to mention here is that here in the US, we do have cacao production because we can find small plantations of cacao in Puerto Rico and in Hawaii. And it makes sense because they are located within the range of the 20 degrees, actually north of the equator. So cacao trees basically only prosper under specific conditions. You know, this include uniform temperatures, high humidity, abundant rain, and so forth. But in short, these cacao trees develop very well or thrive in rainforests, okay? And the world's leading producers of cacao beans are Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Indonesia. As you can see here, they are highlighted in the dark blue color, right? And I wanted to make a disclaimer here, because even though Ivory Coast and Ghana produce over half of the world's cacao, that is what we call the ordinary cacao, right? When it comes to the specialty or the premium cacao, most of that cacao is produced in Ecuador. Ecuador produces around 65% of the specialty cacao beans that exist in the market. I'm not sure if I'm going to mention this again in the next slides, but the origin of cacao is actually in the northern basin of the Amazon rainforest. So that's this area shared between Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. So that's why you see a lot of varieties that have been found over there. And in fact, cacao, the origins of cacao in Africa actually comes from French producers that took cacao beans from these regions of South America to African producing countries. So I know that this also relates with the whole history of how they discovered America and so forth. And you have probably heard that it was the Spaniards that when they came to America, and when I mean America, I mean the Caribbean and the Central American part of the continent, not the US. They found the Mayan tribes or the Mayan people drinking this chocolate drink that they call chocolat. Probably I'm butchering the right pronunciation of the name, but take into account that was around 1500s or 1600s after Christ, right? So the evidence that have been found in the Amazon northern basin shows that people were already using cacao as a food product, as drinks, 5,000 years before Christ, for you to have an idea of how all this goes into time. So of course, because cacao is an agricultural product, it will suffer from climate change impacts. So in general, in agriculture, impacts are likely to disproportionately affect agricultural systems in the tropics, which coincidentally are the areas where cacao beans are produced. So we will see negative effects on yields, which are expected to be larger compared with other temperature zones, like probably subtropics or more parts in the north or the south where it's cooler. We will see that the smallholder systems will also experience a disproportionate effect of climate change because they have lower resilience due to their limited available resources. Again, I mentioned to you very briefly before, they have limited access to technology, especially for post-harvest practices, but also, for access to markets, inputs like fertilizer, herbicides, and so forth. So climate change will have differential impacts at the end of the day on individual crop species or on different varieties and growing areas. So it's going to be a very heterogeneous, and it will come to a case-by-case scenario. So in the case of chocolate, climate change affects our consumption, will affect more than our consumption, the production of chocolate. And this could mean that prices will hike in the short term if the supply gets affected by climate change effects. So while it's not fully understood, people are still doing research on this. One thing is clear, that chocolate in our candies, in our cakes, or the confections, or in drinks, or anything that we use chocolate for, and more importantly, the people who make it will face a series of climate-related change in the near future. So cacao, well, the scientific name is Fibroma cacao, is expected to be very vulnerable to climate change. So cacao evolved in the Amazon northern basin as an understory tree native. An understory basically means a tree that, that develops higher than the ground, but not at the canopy of the rainforest. So cacao is very drought sensitive. It's very sensitive to high temperatures, and because of this, changes in precipitation can negatively impact its growth, its productivity, and its yield quality. And there is increasing evidence that indicates that climate change is already affecting cacao cultivation around the world, resulting in higher mortality. And this is not only related with floods, but also with the development of fungal diseases. There has been a couple of studies conducted in Ecuador and Peru that shows that these climate change trends are not eliminating rains, but concentrating them in short amounts of periods, which leads to floods, which leads to the development of fungal diseases. So cacao is pretty much susceptible to changes in climate. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change actually modeled the future of cacao under a business as usual scenario in Ivory Coast and in Ghana. And they found that these two countries, which are the main players in the overall total production of cacao, they will experience an increase of 3.8 Fahrenheit degrees or 2.1 Celsius, which at the end of the day translates into a marked reduction in suitable cultivation area by year 2050. And this will also shift or change the optimal altitudes for cacao cultivation. So in the bottom line, as you can see here in these pictures, the green areas that we highlight here in Ghana and Ivory Coast are gonna be reduced. So at the end of the day, governments and production systems will have to face the choice of giving priority to either cacao to meet a global product demand, which is chocolate, or preserving natural habitat, or using these available lands that are suitable for new climate change scenarios to other crops. So all those come into play. But not everything is dark in that sense, not dark chocolate, but it's uncertainty. But there is also new hope, and I just tried to make a mean of this because just last year there was actually during December there was a new recent research published that found that in Peru, cacao producers, well, first thing they found is that they confirmed what the other studies that I mentioned before found, that these climate change scenarios will decrease the optimal area for cultivations. However, what is important about the new evidence is that they found that wild cacao may thrive with environment where the resilient strains in Peru can grow, actually expanding by more than a third by 2070. Bottom line, while cacao varieties, those that have not been domesticated and that still exist in the Amazon region, are going to be likely to increase its production and expand, which is really good news because up to 2019 or 2020, all of the scenarios basically show that cacao cultivation areas are going to be decimated because of this change of climate change. But again, there is a caution with this research. And with all the development in the chocolate market, is that we chocolate lovers shouldn't celebrate too soon. Why? Because even if these wild cacao varieties do well in the forest or warmer clouds because of climate change, that doesn't mean it will grow, or these varieties will grow well enough under a cultivation to replace varieties that have been domesticated already and that are used for plantations, right? So we also need to test to find the creme, the chocolate creme, or basically the types of varieties of cacao that would prove hardiest in these changing climate conditions, in hotter conditions, more volatile, and possibly more pest-ridden climate. Because again, fungal diseases is a big problem among cacao plantations. Other strategies that the governments and the International Cacao Organization are also exploring with these changing scenarios is well, the first one relates to what I already mentioned, in to find the specific breeds of cacao that thrive in extreme conditions and make them available to farmers all around the world. But also they are looking into other options, such as providing cacao trees with shade. And this is supposed to help decrease both temperatures and evapotranspiration. And this actually goes according to the development of the cacao tree, which evolved in the Amazon basin. And as again, it was a type of tree that developed under the shade of other taller trees. I think I'm just running out of time, so I'm just gonna close with this quote. And I think that it's very important for all of us as chocolate lovers. So while we may not be able to grow our own chocolate in our own backyard here in Arizona, we can still enjoy these most delectable of treats. I mean, I'm very passionate about chocolate. I consider myself a chocolate lover. So this Excelsius, or this delectable treat, which is chocolate, is delivered to us from exotic lands. As I briefly mentioned, this product that we eat normally comes from Ecuador, comes from Indonesia, from Madagascar, from Ivory Coast, Cameroon, and so forth. So if cacao growers are able to plan for the future and adapt to climate change and face all these hurdles and being successful, that would be good news for us too as chocolate lovers, and not only for us, but also to our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. That was a very interesting presentation. And I'd like to start the questioning where you ended the presentation, which is really to discuss a bit more about the adaptation strategies, particularly focused on the producers, to understand what capacity and what needs are there to increase the producer's ability to adapt to the impacts of climate change, and what types of resources are available to support those communities as they adapt to the impacts of climate change on this agricultural product, which, as you note, is very important both economically and culturally in many of the locations that you discussed. So can you just elaborate a little bit more on the adaptation strategies?
Yeah, I mean, but we analyze the whole value chain, right? So cacao production is just the very first step of the very end product, which is chocolate that we like to eat. So there is a couple of years ago, the United Nations published this study where they examined the share of the price of the chocolate bar, how much that actually goes to the farmer in Ecuador or in Indonesia, and it's less than 2%. Which is, I would say, oh, I'm surprised by this, but it's not really surprised. It's the same phenomenon that we observe in many of the agricultural value chains, which is, most of the share of the final product actually go to the processing and marketing stages of the value chain. So in that sense, there are many issues on top of climate change that affect, the livelihood of farmers in developing countries. So one of them is the access, as I mentioned before, to technology, to capital, to basically offer a better product and get better prices. So we have worked with this project with Inter-American Development Bank, where we have been surveying cooperatives of cacao producers in Ecuador. And what we find out is that those cooperatives that have invested more in post-harvest practices, more in infrastructure for fermentation and for drying, they have been able to receive almost 2 or 3 times the price as the other producers. So that's something basic that we can start right now, and it doesn't require 10 or 20 years the development that takes a new variety of cacao, right? That's one. Another issue that I didn't touch around here is another one that also comes every 2 or 3 years into the news, into the New York Times, and it's the issue of child labor. Specifically in African countries, there is a lot of recorded cases and lawsuits. Again, last year there was a lawsuit that didn't pass through here in the US, but farmers and the conditions of exploitation in cacao plantations in Africa are very severe. So that's another issue that we also need to take into account on top of climate change, of course, right? Market power and imperfect markets in developing countries, which is another big issue that we have been doing research on this to see how not only the processing industry, again, at the end of the day, climate change will not impact the factory in Hershey, Pennsylvania, or in Tokyo for maize, right? I mean, they would just adjust in the terms of, adjusting the temperatures or even the processes. What it's in the whole value chain, the biggest impact will be the production side. So again, if we need to help farmers, yes, we need better varieties that we will not stop climate change. That's the way I see it. So we need to adapt to it. So we need better varieties that can deal better with these changes in rains and changes in temperatures that are more resistant to diseases. But also we need to help farmers in terms of, development of new technologies accessible to them. Also marketing strategies as well. So that would be my short answer for that.
No, I think you answered some of the question and also raised many additional topics we can discuss. And as Alexis and I were chatting before the participants joined, I was sharing that just 2 years ago, I had a chance to visit Ecuador and had an opportunity to visit a cooperative near the community of Tena in the Amazonia, and had a chance to learn about this cooperative that was foregrounding and trying to promote the Quechua people, and particularly providing economic opportunity for women in that community. So I think, Alexis, it sounds like the work that you're doing in Ecuador and with the Inter-American Development Bank is potentially a very promising approach to not only address some of the social sustainability concerns regarding those communities, but also possibly help to drive more of the value, or more, have a greater value return to the producers by investing in the infrastructure needed to help them to be able to provide high quality products and gain greater value. So let me go to some of the questions coming in from our audience, and then we'll address many of the sustainability challenges that you raised in that first response. So we have a question that's come in that's asked about precipitation and temperature changes, which are two of the main effects of global climate change in terms of how that Earth systems process materializes, is the way that we see the effects on rising temperatures and disruptions to precipitation. But altitude doesn't change. And as you noted, these cacao, the production has a particular zone where the quality is highest. So are there impacts from climate change that are projected by IPCC and other agencies to look at how those areas may get wetter and cooler, could see increased cacao production? Like, are there areas, the idea of migrating the production to the more suitable habitat over time?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this in the presentation. Yes, and that's the the answer will be yes. But again, it all comes down to what are the country's priorities, right? We will keep producing cacao, or this new available land, or at least the land that we were not using before, should we use it for cacao production or for other crops? Because I cannot make this as a claim, but if an area would not be suitable for cacao production, might not be able to produce other crops as well. So will we be constrained by such political and climate factors, and we need to take decisions. So if at the end I guess my guess is that it will depend on the markets, right? If the share of markets and the profitability of cacao will be increased for farmers, that will mean that they will at the end select the crops that leads the highest profits for them. One thing that we have observed not only in Ecuador but also in Ivory Coast and in Ghana is that a lot of the current cacao plantations are very old. We see plantations that have been going on for 60, 70, 80 years, with trees that are 10, 15 meters tall. And these plantations have been inherited by generations. So another thing that, something policymakers can explore is trying to renovate these plantations and try to make them more productive. Because one of the things that we observe is these old plantations have lower yields. And again, it's pretty normal because of the cycle of the tree, right? But if we can somehow, renovate those plantations, that will also help farmers.
Yeah, and so I understand that some of the practices that could allow the producers to adapt and also increase their productivity and value relate to, layering of crops, pruning of trees, and can also provide other benefits related to improvements in biodiversity conservation. And so it sounds like investments in those practices to help adapt to climate change, but also increase the productivity of the lands would be valuable. So additional questions that come in. So in many sustainability considerations, we think about approaches to responsible consumption. So
Yes.
how do consumers help to drive sustainability in the chocolate industry by purchasing decisions and putting pressure on manufacturers? So if you were to encourage people to engage in a responsible consumption of chocolate, what types of individual practices, and thinking about the larger retail market, how could we make reforms to improve the signal that is sent to producers and to the entire value chain?
I wish I had a straight answer for that, but I don't. But I can elaborate on some things that I have observed from my own experience. There is this new movement that we call from bean to bar, right? So where there is small chocolate processors, chocolatiers that we like to call artisanal chocolate processors that they, for example, from Michigan, I observed that here in California as well, they travel directly to Peru, to the Dominican Republic. They outsource their cacao directly from the farms and they elaborated there. That it's a very sustainable, very niche and very cute business model that is not actually scalable for big operations. So if you have to ask me, I will say it will be kind of responsible if you buy directly your chocolate products from those artisanal, processors of chocolate. But once you go, with products such as Ferrero or products from Mondelez or Lind, the traceability systems around the world have not been developed yet to tell you specifically if this cacao bean is, socially responsible, if it is not involved with child labor and so forth. There is a huge area of need in these terms. And it's not only, again, a problem of Africa, it's also a problem with Latin America. There are no traceability systems. Governments like to brag about that. Yes, we have these traceability systems as well. But again, we have been working with this project with the Inter-American Development Bank. And what we have found out is that it's not. I mean, exporters, there is a huge amount of intermediaries in Latin American value chains of cacao. And intermediaries, there are 2 or 3 intermediaries between the farmers and the exporters. And in most of the cases, there are a mix of varieties. And it's really impossible to tell where this specific cacao bean comes from, unless the processor goes directly to the farmer and buy it directly from them.
Right, that's a really interesting point.
So in those sense, there are, my advice would be to buy chocolate from small processors, not those giant ones, because I'm not blaming the giant processors on this. It's because their operations are so big that they need to source cacao beans from all these, exporters that cannot justify where the cacao beans are. So some of the...
To that point, one of the other questions is from the audience about a particular small batch, I believe it's small batch, but Tony's Chocolonely, which is a chocolate producer that is focusing on ethical production and in particular efforts to end the use of child labor and in the industry. So I know that we have some of our sustainability community who are involved in this effort directly.
Well, on those notes, I have to tell you that at least, I won't say 100%, but 99% of chocolates that are produced with being sourced from Latin America are also modern slavery. So one of the things that I have heard about is the development of a new label that certifies that chocolates are child labor free, right? Which again, it sounds really cool for producers and processors that are related with Latin America, but at the same time will harm products from Africa, which are also in need. I mean, the problem is very complex. Farmers use their children because they have all their constraints as well. So it's not like, okay, I'm not gonna buy your product because you use your children in the production systems. The problem goes beyond that. It's also related with conflict, and I mean, we can keep talking about this because this just keeps expanding, and that's one of the great things about cacao, right? It involves so many issues, so many things that we can analyze. We're also, for example, right now exploring the behavioral economics behind cacao production. We are trying to see why farmers that do acknowledge and know that renovating the plantations will make them better off, why they are not taking those decisions. why they are not pruning, why they are not renovating. And in one of our last year, sponsored by the Marley Foundation here through ASU, we went to conduct an aspirations experiment in Ecuador and see if aspirations actually, help understand us why farmers make investments in the long term or not.
Oh, that's very interesting. Now, are there any lessons learned, or are there any practices that have been developed, for example, in the coffee trade that are applicable or that are being utilized also in the chocolate industry? Because of course, coffee has many of the similar challenges that you described across, from social environmental impact, adaptation to climate change, addressing their labor force, and there have been practices such as the cafe practices in the coffee industry and other efforts. So is there any crossover, or are there any lessons that are being translated from coffee to chocolate?
I think most of them
go so well together as well.
Of course. I love the chocolate covered grains of coffee. Those are the best. But no, I think a lot of them, I won't say all of them, but a lot of the practices that we have seen adopted by the cacao industry were originally developed by the coffee sector. And especially in terms of labels and certification, all this Rainforest Alliance, fair trade, company bees, and so forth have been adopted from the development that the coffee sector actually lead 20, 30 years ago. And now we're seeing those same things now in cacao, right? Although they are different products, they have a lot of similarities. One of the things that have also been imported from the coffee systems is the use of cooperatives of farmers. I know that those cooperatives or association focus was a huge thing in the 50s, in the 60s, promoted by United Nations and so forth. But then the focus changed, right? Because they showed that they didn't really work well for other crops. But now we have seen the experience of coffee producers that if they associate, they have more bargaining power and market power as well. Same lessons that we're learning in the coffee sector have been applying into the cacao sector. And that's why we have seen that even though we wish to see more cacao associations, there are still a few, but farmers are beginning to recognize that by working as a group, they might have better market power against intermediaries. They might also have better access to capital to invest in fermentation and drying practices. Because that's one of the things that shocked me the most when I have seen this in the field, is that I have seen farmers that have these really rich varieties of cacao in terms of flavor and aroma, but then they don't have the facilities to ferment and dry this. So they just do it on the ground, and all the richness that they have in their product there is just lost. So even though they could have been earning 3 or 4 more times the price of the ordinary variety, at the end they don't, and it's because they don't have access to these capitals.
Right, and obviously a collective approach may benefit many of those producers, especially if they were to join forces around the fermentation process and other parts of the production process. And so, yeah, and what about the ability to provide pressure from some of the larger retailers, right? So in the cafe example, this ethical sourcing approach in the coffee industry, one of the major retailers, Starbucks, is adopting and putting pressure onto their supply chain, right? So that they will require additional certification from the producer. So even it helps to address that sort of mixing challenge that that you addressed for some of the big retailers. So if they require that all of their suppliers follow the same standards and practice, then it helps to create a uniformity across all of those different producers. Plus, if there are more cooperatives of producers together with standard practices. Now, this is obviously a significant challenge of a very distributed, global trade. But is that something you've seen? Is there any interest? Have you worked with any of the larger retailers? And is there any interest in them, or are they too focused on, their profit margins and
I think we are slowly getting there. With higher incomes, we have seen an explosion of demand from Asian countries. China is now consuming a lot of chocolate, and 20 years ago they didn't consume that much. Countries like Saudi Arabia and Middle Eastern countries are also consuming more chocolate now. So again, there is a lot of heterogeneity in the demand there. And in that sense, demand until this day exceeds the supply of chocolate. So for big producers like the top 5 that I mentioned before, they don't have a problem, positioning the products because the demand exceeds what is currently supplied right now. So in that sense, I'm pretty sure that if demand gets more towards the side of asking or requiring this type of, we call it credence attributes, and in the literature, like, being sustainable, responsible, and, have benefited farmers and so forth, we will get there. But to this point, we have not reached that. And it's mainly because, at the end of the day, we don't care, or we don't question about that if we get an M&M's or a Hershey's bar of chocolate, right? But we will probably care if we pay $5 or $10 for a gourmet chocolate that we find here in fries. So it depends again on the type of consumer, but my guess is that we will slowly get there, which is the same thing as we are serving in coffee, right? We are asking for this new transparency in the coffee supply chain, but not everybody is still, worrying about it. So I'm pretty sure that food, and this is a phenomenon not only in coffee and chocolate, but in the whole food system, right? So as incomes evolve, people start, taking more care about this, and we have seen this. I mean, we have this model that it's probably pretty much similar to the Maslow hierarchy of priorities, right? As our income increase, we first cover our nutritional needs. So now we're more focused on towards, okay, this coffee or this chocolate actually has higher content of sugar, is it gluten-free, and so forth, right? But the next level will be to care for these other social and environmental impacts. And we're not quite there yet, but we're on the transition, okay? So as our incomes increases, we eventually will take care more of that.
Yeah, it just reinforces the notion that to address many of our global sustainability challenges, many of the root causes of those problems can be addressed by increasing education, women's empowerment, income, equality, and then some of these other issues begin to become more tangible, more salient to people. If they have those other concerns more secure, especially as you noted that so much of the production of this resource occurs in countries with developing economies. One of our participants has asked to change the topic a little bit, just has asked about alternative growing environments. Is it possible to grow cacao in greenhouses? Are there any kind of alternatives to increase the supply and potentially increase the adaptive capacity of the farmers and producers to climate through controlling some of the circumstances?
I've seen a couple experiments actually in Puerto Rico and in Hawaii where they're trying to grow trees in greenhouses, but just for research purposes. At the very end of the day, it's not really profitable. For you to have an idea, after you plant the cacao trees, you will start harvesting 4 or 5 years after you plant your cacao tree, which doesn't seem very profitable if you invest in a greenhouse or in any close location to try to control for all these factors. So other operations like tomato production or other greenhouse type of agricultural products are more profitable in the short term and medium term. So that doesn't make it really attractive. And even though there's people already experimented with that, I don't see that happening, not in the near, not in the long future. Same thing with coffee. So there has been people that for research purposes have done this, but coffee is not going to go into greenhouses. What really surprised me is that I've seen small plantations of coffee in the south of California now, which is, goes along with this shifting of, suitable areas for the production. So probably in the near future, we will have cacao trees in California as well.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. Another one of our participants asks about GMO, genetically modified organisms. Is GMO an approach that's utilized within cacao production and chocolate production?
That is a really good question, and I haven't seen that yet. Mm-hmm. There might be someone doing that, but it has not been widely available, or it's still pretty secret. What we see, it's a normal cross of different varieties doing mm-hmm. in a very normal way, right? We haven't seen a lot of GMO technology applied to cacao. That will be an interesting avenue of research, I guess, in the future. But again, this is the thing, right? So the tree is mostly produced in developing countries. And as you might suspect, the development of GMOs are mostly related with countries that have the technology and the incomes to support this kind of research.
Right.
So unless France or Germany or the US start growing cacao heavily, there might be some investments in GMO development. But at the stage the things are right now, I don't see Ecuador or Ghana, whatever it goes, investing in GMO developments for cacao production.
Right. So then I'll ask the next question, and that is, again, to change the topic just a little bit, and it's now related more to your teaching and engagement with students. When you work with students in your courses, or when you mentor students, what attracts them to this kind of topic? What types of interests do they share? What are their motivations, and do you work with students who really want to get involved in this, in this industry in a way to have some kind of positive impact? And, just tell me a little bit about how you engage students in your work.
This is a great question. So I teach introduction to agribusiness, and for a lot of students, and this is a really cool class because it's not only for students looking to get a degree in agribusiness, but it's an elective class. So I get people from all over Asia in different degrees. And through this class, most of the students, they get their first experience on what we call food value chains in agri-food systems, right? So my main goal is to try to expose them to all the things that I barely mentioned here, right? So we have agricultural production, but it's connected to everything we do. In this specific case, we have chocolate production. And what I try to do is to make them aware that whatever that we consume today, where we are, is most likely coming from another place that is overseas and have huge implications. So one of the things that I also do is I invite several guest speakers into my class. So in this specific case, I invite every time a good friend and a co-author of mine that conducted her research actually at the University of Hawaii and University of Tokyo to talk about chocolate production systems. But we also touch about, beer production and how that, relates to hops production here in the US. We talk about retailing here, like fries and so forth. And my guess is that students get attracted because they get to see, in most cases, for the first time, that agriculture, agribusiness, and food systems is not only about the type of seed of the GMO or the poor farmer that doesn't have access to the fertilizer. It encompasses a huge system that has so many opportunities around it. So one of the ways that I used to say to try to attract my students is to tell them there are always opportunities in the agribusiness and food related sector. And you will never see a graduate for this type of, of careers. Having said, there are no jobs in this area. So with that being said, at the very end of the day, I do my best and try to attract students. And at the end, all of us have different interests. So depending on what they see, if they are really interested in international affairs, agriculture is also a really nice way to see it. I mean, I don't know if you have heard, and this is for the audience, we have a FAS, the Food Agricultural Service, the Foreign Agricultural Service, which is basically being an ambassador to agricultural related issues all around the world from the US. So, and I keep talking the whole day about this because it's a thing that I'm really passionate about.
I really enjoy it. I think it's taking a particular topic like chocolate, or a particular consumer good that's so popular and so widely loved, and that allows you to look at this value chain and supply chain and really explore so many issues: environmental, social and cultural, economics. There's so many topics that are opened up as you follow this product around the world, that so many people, and the same thing as you say for hops and beer. Great way to engage students and get them thinking about these complex challenges. I would ask, have you, or are you planning to do any study abroad opportunities as we return, to having opportunities for international travel? Have you thought about, a study abroad course around chocolate?
I submitted a grant proposal and I'm waiting for them, because what we want to do is take our students on a summer research internship to Puerto Rico to try to analyze their cacao value chain. And also they also have coffee value chain because of their location. and investigate, or at least ask farmers how they cope with this climate change, because we have seen that more hurricanes have been happening during the last 5 to 6 years. So we are really interested to see how farmers are coping with them. What are the mechanisms they are using? What are the impacts of the market channels they have been used to do? So yes, we do have that in mind. We're just waiting on grant money to be approved. So if we eventually get it, that's our next step. Try to expose at least our students from Arizona State University to other contexts, because and I really like this about Puerto Rico. It has a different language. It's still part of the US, but it's a complete different thing. We have tropical weather, we have different crops, we have different dynamics over there that we cannot observe here. So we want to expose our students to that dynamics too.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I am mentoring 2 of our students who came to ASU from UPR following the impacts of the hurricanes previously, and one of those students is working on the adaptive capacity and the rebuilding of the community water infrastructure in Puerto Rico. So I think it's a wonderful way to engage the students and also to help to contribute to some of the recovery efforts in Puerto Rico. So it looks like we have volunteer. One of our participants would like to sign up for.
Oh yeah, we will need support from faculty too. So
yeah, absolutely.
Cross your fingers.
Yeah, so best wishes for that successful proposal. And with that, Lauren, I think I'm going to bring our conversation to a close here. Lauren, who has alerted us to some other events that are coming up. And so there are some links there to the next event coming on the 21st. And also Lauren is reminding us that we're going to publish our webinars on the YouTube channel. So for folks who have not been able to join us today, they can come back and to see that. And we'll share some of these other resources, the links that we've been putting into the chat with our participants. And so I just want to say, thank you for the great questions coming in from the audience. Thank you, Alexis, for taking the time to be with us today and for sharing your work. And we look forward to hearing about all the great things that you do and you do with your students here at ASU.
Thank you. It was great meeting you. And again, if you really want to talk about chocolate, coffee, that's my thing. I'm just happy to share it with you. I can talk the whole day about chocolate and coffee, so that will be no problem.
And this is Lauren, just to say our next event with you will be featuring chocolate samples probably from Tony's and other fair trade, locally owned and operated chocolatiers. We'd love to have you back and then get some chocolate and coffee sampling. I think that would be a great idea. We've done that in the past. And happy Valentine's week, everyone. Valentine's month, Valentine's year. Thank you so much for the great talk.
It's the season.
Lots of kudos. Thank you, everyone.